Dee Dee Blanchard, Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy Part 2. Hello, we continue our analysis of the behaviours of Dee Dee Blanchard to look deeper at what she is, with a worked example to help you understand and also to shed light on the failure of others to recognise this. Dee Dee Blanchard had multiple health concerns about her daughter. However, physicians could not find lab-supported evidence to corroborate those concerns. This demonstrates, of course, a disconnect between what Dee Dee Blanchard believed and what was the actuality. There was no evidence to support what she contended, yet in her world, her deluded world, she believed that her daughter was unwell with a variety of conditions and concerns. Notwithstanding this, she was still able to obtain prescription medications that appear to have taken a cumulative toll on Gypsy Rose. While still a child, many of her teeth had decayed or had fallen out from the combined effects of her being given seizure medication that she didn't need, sense of entitlement, absence of emotional empathy, and the removal of her salivary glands, a measure Dee Dee reportedly insisted was necessary to prevent her daughter from drooling. Delusion, assertion of control, absence of emotional empathy. Gypsy Rose would later tell ABC News that Dee Dee had induced the drooling reflex intentionally, administering a topical anaesthetic to Gypsy Rose's gums in order to persuade doctors that she needed treatment. Now, pausing there. The likely narcissism of Dee Dee Blanchard naturally drives her to behave in a particular way to seek the prime aims, and thus she needs to control her daughter, and she needs to control the physicians by having them believe her that there's something wrong with her daughter. In order to maximize that and suggest, look, she's drooling, in that moment she administers a topical anaesthetic to induce the drooling, to then assert control over the doctors by saying, look, there's your evidence. Her delusion that there is drooling is such that she has to take steps to cause it to be induced in order to assert control over the relevant physicians. Nevertheless, it wasn't a singular phenomenon that she had engaged in here. Surgeries, prescriptions, and clinical visits were routine through Gypsy Rose's childhood. And her mother took her out of school, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, absence of emotional empathy, assertion of control, to keep her at home during Gypsy Rose's elementary years, furthermore alienating her from perceived interfering influences, a common step taken by a narcissist. Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005 while the pair was living in public housing in the New Orleans outskirts city of Slidell, and the storm wrought the same damage on their apartment as it did across a wider area. Following a brief stay at a relief shelter in the North Shore Lake Pontchartrain town of Covington, they were airlifted to a new home in Missouri. An uplifting media narrative, already buoyed by periodic feature coverage of the family's perseverance, brought fresh attention, in other words, fresh fuel, to the family's ordeal through Katrina and beyond. And by 2008, Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose were living in a new Habitat for Humanity home, complete with accessibility features, residual benefits, including a wheelchair ramp, in the Springfield, Missouri area. A Louisiana native, Dee Dee Blanchard was 48 years old at the time of her murder. Much of what is known of her early life has come in the form of family testimonials shared with the media after her death. In the 2017 HBO documentary Mommy, Dead and Dearest, family members said she showed an early propensity for theft as a form of personal retribution, response to threat to control, asset appropriation, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, lack of emotional empathy, and even suspected that she may have hastened the death of her ailing mother by withholding food from her, manipulative behaviour, absence of emotional empathy. Controlling relationships by manipulating the private, intimate nuances of family dynamics may have been an early trait that Dee Dee carried into adulthood. In other words, her narcissism. She reportedly held a tight rein on Gypsy Rose's childhood attempts at doing more than her fragile and sickly image suggested, delivering behavioural cues by tightly squeezing Gypsy Rose's hand when in public, assertion of control through physical means, and severely restricting her unsupervised access via phones and computers to the outside world. Again, nullification of potential threats to control as a consequence of the utilisation of alienation. Dee Dee appears to have worked as a nurse's aide in her early adulthood at some point, making her conversant enough in clinical culture, her family believes, to cue physicians and staff towards particular outcomes for Gypsy Rose, character trait acquisition. By the time Katrina hit in 2005, the occasion allowed her to inform Gypsy Rose's doctors in their New Missouri home that Gypsy Rose's medical records had been lost in the resulting flood, telling of lie, a story that later was proven false via court discovery after Dee Dee's murder. Though her family has suspected her of abuses that predate the birth of Gypsy Rose's stepmother, Laura, told HBO that Dee Dee had tried to poison her with weed killer, for instance. Attempt to physically harm, lack of emotional empathy. Her only documented criminal history had involved non-violent infractions like writing bad checks, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability. But Gypsy Rose said in the same documentary that the threat of physical force, use of threat as a means to control, always loomed in their home. Dee Dee had reportedly smashed Gypsy Rose's computer with a hammer, destruction of property, in one of her earlier attempts at contacting a man, tying her to a bed for 2 weeks after the incident, imprisonment, and threatening to break her hands with a hammer, use of threat, if Gypsy Rose ever attempted anything similar again. Not long before Dee Dee's murder, at least one doctor, Missouri pediatric neurologist Bernardo Flasterstein, observed that much of what Dee Dee said about Gypsy Rose's health needs could not be confirmed by medicine, and suspected that Dee Dee had been fabricating her daughter's narrative of sicknesses and symptoms by abusing her position as Gypsy Rose's caretaker, a phenomenon known as factitious disorder imposed on another and formally referred to as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. In the current version of Professional Mental Health Guide, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, FDIA, is described as imposing fabricated symptoms of illness on another person as a means of gaining the sympathy of others, i.e. pity play, fuel, rather than addressing, absence of emotional empathy, the purported underlying sickness itself. Typically demonstrated by mothers or other people in a caretaker role, the psychological basis for FDIA lies with the caretaker and not with the patient, and indicates that sympathy or attention, not money or other material rewards, serves as the caretaker's reason for misrepresenting a patient's needs. In actual fact, I would take issue with that, because invariably it's a narcissist that is behaving in this way, and they do want sympathy and attention, fuel, but they would also, but not necessarily always, seek money or other material rewards, residual benefits. In cases, the article continues, where a person makes similar false health claims on their own behalf, the phenomenon historically has been referred to as Munchausen syndrome. The by proxy appellation is applied in cases such as Gypsy Rose's, when a caretaker projects false symptoms onto the person in their care. Gypsy Rose pleaded guilty in 2016 to second-degree murder of her mother, with Missouri prosecutors opting not to pursue a higher charge or maximum prison term, owing to the extraordinary circumstances of her case. As part of her plea deal, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison, the Missouri minimum for a second-degree murder charge, and is currently serving her term at the state's Chillicothe Correctional Center. Though her 10-year prison term is set to end in 2026, Gypsy will be eligible for parole in December of 2023. While serving her sentence, she got married last year to Louisiana resident Ryan Scott Anderson. She was previously engaged to another man. With regard to Nick Gojon, he confessed to investigators that he wielded the knife that stabbed Dee Dee Blanchard, portraying his role in the murder as that of the actor in a mutually agreed upon plan between himself and Gypsy Rose, whom he said remained locked in a nearby bathroom throughout the ordeal, to kill Dee Dee and begin a new life together. Though Go John shared none of Gypsy Rose's physical disabilities, he had been diagnosed with autism at an early age and tested at an IQ of 82, with the functional ability of a 10-year-old. During the discovery phase of his murder trial, Go John told police that he killed Dee Dee because Gypsy Rose felt it was her only way to be with me, and that he knew before travelling from Wisconsin to Missouri in June of 2015, his second visit to see Gypsy Rose, that killing Dee Dee was a planned part of the trip. In the same police interview, Go John said that he and Gypsy Rose had sex inside the house after Dee Dee was dead. The pair would later mail the knife that Go John used in the stabbing back to Wisconsin, before travelling there themselves by bus. In November of 2018, a Missouri jury returned a guilty verdict in Go John's trial, convicting him of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Prosecutors had declined to seek a possible death penalty in the case, leaving him to serve a mandatory life sentence without parole in prison. Last year, an imprisoned Go John petitioned the court for a new trial, citing ineffective defence counsel during his first one. Thus, the abuser, Dee Dee Blanchard, was killed. The two co-conspirators that plotted her death are currently in prison. But what this article and so many others does is fail to recognise that this was the behaviour of a narcissist, operating with a sense of entitlement, a failure to operate with emotional empathy. An individual who used the supposed ailments of her daughter to garner the prime aims to control other people, to draw fuel from other people, and obtain residual benefits. A better understanding of narcissism would enable these individuals to better understand what the dynamic really is, and for those to take the appropriate action to ensure that the relevant victims are properly protected from the behaviour of the narcissist. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.